So what do you think for Darren Till at this point in time? I mean, Masvidal is obviously going to get a big fight, a title eliminator type fight. I don't think it's going to be a title fight. But what do you do if you are Darren Till? Because even though he seemed to, I don't want to say master the cut, Kenny, but he seemed to put himself in position to make the weight this time around. I'm not sure I see him long-term as a UFC welterweight. He's only 24 years old. He's only going to continue to grow into his frame. Do you think it's an eventuality that this guy's moving up to middleweight or not necessarily?
I don't think he needs to necessarily move to 185 for his next fight. I certainly think it would be a good reset career-wise for him. Right. I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary. As he gets older, though, I see him fighting at 185 for sure. Listen, I thought he looked physically much, much better here in this fight against Jorge Masvidal. You know, like he looked good on the scale. He looked good during the fight as far as, you know, he didn't look so sunken in. He looked like he had his energy. He looked like he had his strength. That's what it seemed like. That's not always the case. But to me, listen, defensively, he just needs to get better. Just because something works in a fight doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And I think coaches are really failing overall in mixed martial arts as far as not telling their fighters what to do, what the right things are defensively in mixed martial arts. You can't just sit in the pocket. It is not boxing. You don't have big gloves on. You know, a lot of these things are not being fixed. And listen, you can't tackle everything at the same time, but this isn't something that Darren Till just did here in this fight against Jorge Masvidal. He's been doing this for a very long time. And again, just because he's not getting hit or getting clocked with big shots doesn't mean it doesn't need to be fixed. So I think you can't leave these things unaddressed. So for me, it comes down to Darren Till just being better defensively, fixing those technical errors, and getting right back, getting right back in there. I think after a knockout like this, it can't be right away. He's going to have to give his brain and body a rest. Yeah. I hope that he doesn't go right back into sparring. He needs to give himself some time, but really fix the technical errors. And then, you know, whether it's a reset at 185 or another fight at 170, it should be a little bit of time.
Yeah. I love Till as a fighter. I love him as a promoter. I love when you turn head coach on me too. I might have to take a charity fight just so you can corner me and coach. You know, it is crazy because I think with you and Dominic Cruz is like if all things were equal, right, and you could make $1 million a year being the head coach of an MMA team, right? We are going to get to a point. I don't know how many years down the line where coaches will be paid what they're worth. You know, I know some coaches make 5% of the gross purse. You know, others a little bit more than that. But I don't know, Ken Flo. I know teams and Faber and others have come at you in the past, but I think you miss your calling as the head coach of an MMA juggernaut. Maybe it may Rocky BJJ kid get something.
We'll see. But, you know, I think Darren Till really has so much potential, man. This is a kid who really could be a future title holder. It just comes down to really getting the right knowledge. It's a knowledge game. That's what it comes down to. And I think for Darren Till, just getting the right people around him, fixing those mistakes, this kid can get right back in there, whether it's at 170 or 185.
Any thoughts on the co-main event? I thought Leon Edwards deserved to win a unanimous decision. It was split 29-27, 29-28, and the wayward dissenting judge 28-29 for Gunnar Nelson. There's a whole Nelson narrative and storyline to this as well. Maybe his ceiling's a little bit lower than some had projected in terms of his welterweight future. What are your thoughts on Edwards now having won 7 in a row, the win by decision over Gunnar Nelson?
Well, listen, I was really impressed with Leon Edwards. I knew this was a very tough fight for Gunnar Nelson. I have a lot of respect for Gunny. He's done some great things in the grappling world. But, you know, this is a guy who hasn't evolved as much as I would like. I think that you can't come in the same guy repeatedly. There's something to be said for fixing mistakes, but there's also something to be said for getting better in this game. And you've heard me say this 1,000 times. If you're not getting better in this game, you're getting worse. And for Leon Edwards, he has gotten better. I think we called his first fight in the UFC. And you remember his wrestling back then? I mean, it was like basically non-existent. And now he looks like a competent and intelligent wrestler. And Gunny just really couldn't get it done up until the end of the last round. And he just also didn't fight with that sense of urgency. I mean, instead of trying to just whale down elbows at Leon Edwards, he was just kind of trying to break that grip and trying to solidify a higher mount. I don't know. I think Gunny is a very patient fighter, but I think that hurt him late in that fight. Instead of, throwing those brutal elbows that he threw against Cowboy Oliveira, he was just way too patient. And Leon Edwards did a great job of stopping a lot of those takedowns, keeping his head level at the proper height. Clinching was great. He was cutting angles. And for Gunny Nelson, he just kept trying to blitz his way in with one shot, and he became very predictable, and it became an easy fight for Leon Edwards, in my opinion. He didn't take a lot of damage in that fight. And yeah, I agree with you. It should have been a unanimous decision for Leon Edwards. And again, the win streak continues for him. And I've been really impressed with his progress, and I think he's going to give other people in the top 10 a very difficult time. And for Gunny, I agree with you. This loss really hurt him.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it any better. Seeing Leon Edwards out wrestle Gunnar Nelson relative to where he was early on in his career is just a crazy thing. All hail Leon Edwards, and he wanted respect on his name, and he's certainly going to get it now. It's just hard to make a run, right? He won a main event against Donald Cerrone. This was a high-profile fight, and even though this wasn't the main event against Darren Till that he wanted, it was a co-main slot against a big name, relatively speaking, in Gunnar Nelson. But for Leon, right, I'm very curious to hear what his team has to say about what transpired after the fact with Jorge Masvidal, because I'm certainly not condoning the action, especially if you're changing your stripes, right? Like, I know when you were critical at times of Henry Cejudo in the past, it's because all of a sudden he became a little bit inauthentic with one of the antics, I think a pre-weigh-in or something or other, right? Stepping outside of yourself for the sake of progressing your career forward. Maybe Cejudo's not a great example because he was getting ready to fight Dillashaw, but I think if you're Leon Edwards, you're like, man, what do I need to do? I've won 7 in a row at 170 pounds, and I'm still, in that bottom third of the top 15. So then maybe you get some bad advice to, go engage with Jorge Masvidal. You take that advice trying to just progress your career forward, Like, I don't know what he does. I mean, maybe they give him somebody like Woodley coming off a loss. I don't know. But for Leon Edwards, it's still going to be 2 or 3 more wins. And with 7 in the can, that's pretty tough for him to swallow, I would think.
Yeah, and then that's the dilemma, right? I mean, you look at Kamaru Usman, of how long it took him to get a title shot. He had to win and win and win and win again before he finally got his title shot. But in the end, obviously, was able to get it done. But there's been other people who had a much shorter track, like a Darren Till, for example. Right. So, it's a tough thing. There's no doubt about it in this day and age of where the UFC is at. I think eventually if Leon Edwards just keeps doing what he's doing and lets his performances speak for themselves, I think he'll eventually get that title shot. But that is a very competitive division. I get why he probably tried to go and pick a fight with Masvidal. The problem is when you pick a fight, sometimes that fight happens. So
the fight happens.
and not regulated. So that was unfortunate. But for Leon, again, he has been impressive. He's winning the right fights. He's beating tough guys. Just needs to continue to do that.
And congrats to the night's other big winners, Molly McCann, Dan Ige, Mark Jacasey with a big win over Joe Duffy, Arnold Allen against Jordan Rinaldi. I thought that was a big win for Arnold Allen. You mentioned Claudia Silva and Danny Roberts. We won't rehash that. Any thoughts on Dominic Reyes and Volkan Oezdemir? The decision by split goes to Reyes. I thought it was a close fight. I can understand why Volkan believes he did enough to win that fight. My thesis statement going in was that this would give us some answers on Dominic Reyes because he was going to fight a former title challenger in Volkan Oezdemir that figured to come in here with a whole lot of purpose, having dropped a couple fights in a row. I thought he got a prime Oezdemir. Close fight, but ultimately it goes to Reyes, and he is still undefeated moving forward.
It was a close fight, and I don't think, to me, it seemed like Dan Hardy, and he's a good analyst, but it seemed like he thought Volkan was going to win that fight straight away. I didn't quite see it that way. I wasn't sure who was going to win that fight. It was very close in my eyes. Yeah. Dominic Reyes obviously ended up getting the nod. Whether he won that fight or not, he's going to learn a lot from it. I
No
think
doubt.
that for him, fighting a guy like Volkan Oezdemir who hits hard, who was switching things up and adding some grappling into his game, I thought was interesting. It was good to see Volkan try to mix those things up. He was finding success with that double leg. So cool to see a guy who comes from a kickboxing background have that kind of success with his double leg takedown. I think Dominic's going to learn a lot from it. I think Dominic did some great things in that fight. Certainly is getting better and improving as a fighter. I thought his pacing was a little bit off. I thought he got a little emotional at times. And, you know, wrestling could be improved. But for Dominic, I think he's going to continue to get better. He's going to learn a lot from that. You know, listen, he's not ready for John Jones yet. No one in that division is. But I think he's probably another few fights away from maybe fighting for the belt. I think when you fight for the belt, you want to put yourself in a position to really try to win it, not just fight for the belt because, oh, you know, you're next in line or there's no one else out there. Take the time to improve your skills and get that fight and get the win. So Reyes is still a little bit away. I think Thiago Santos is still the front runner, in my opinion, to fight for that belt next. And we'll see. I think Reyes is only going to get better from here on out.
Kenflo's on fire today. I totally agree. And to be able to accrue those 15 minutes as Reyes was able to, and to still emerge with a win, I think is really huge for his confidence because there were so many learning lessons in that fight. Certainly, I think with the wrestling and the takedown defense and some clinch exchanges that I think could have been cleaner for him. But it's interesting at 205 pounds because we're always anointing the next because the greatest fighter of all time owns that division right now. That's John Jones. I think you're right. Thiago Marreta Santos, I think, can put himself in position right now in his prime to try to actually win that fight. And to your point, not just fight for it. But when we fast-tracked Johnny Walker a few weeks ago, you know, how do you handicap Johnny Walker versus Dominic Reyes right now? Because I know Dominic Reyes came into the UFC without 3 losses like Johnny Walker. And when Reyes came in, he was immediately put on a pedestal and maybe at times is going to be the victim of those expectations. But, you know, who would you be more excited about to see fight John Jones right now going into the Reyes Oezdemir? I think a lot of people would have said, oh, give me Reyes. Johnny Walker's not ready. I'll tell you right now, Johnny Walker and Dominic Reyes fight on a neutral site next weekend. I'm not sure Dominic Reyes beats Johnny Walker right now. So